It's a much older problem, and that is for 30 years, 40 years, you've built China around a whole series of transfers from direct and some hidden transfers from the household sector to subsidize investment and manufacturing and production in general. And as a result, that's what the institutional structure of China is able to do. You know, we think that it's very easy to increase.
大家好啊，今天是2025年的1月15号，今天给大家分享1月14号北大外籍教授的这个分享。分享中呢，他主要对中国当下的经济和政府的一些救市政策发表了自己的一些看法。有些话我觉得说的还是蛮中肯的。好，我们废话也不多说，一起来看一下他的分享。
David, we have the perfect guest here to discuss the outlook on the Chinese economy. Michael Pettis, finance professor at Peking University. Michael, so great to see you here in Hong Kong. And I want to start with what I think only you can tell us, because you've lived there for more than 2 decades. I'm very sad to hear, by the way, that your usual weekly intellectual discussions about Chinese economy with your students and bankers, that has stopped, which I guess also tells us something about the Chinese economy. But what, in your opinion, is perhaps least captured by the macro data, and what are people on the ground actually feeling about the economy?
Well, you know, it's interesting because sometimes when you live in a place, you don't see the changes take place. But I speak to a lot of people who visit every 6 months or every year or so, and they all tell me the same thing, that there's a feeling of depression, a feeling of nervousness that is very, very evident and very different from the feeling 4, 5, 6 years ago when there was a sense of unlimited potential. That seems to have changed. Hopefully only temporarily, but it certainly seems to have changed.
Okay, and I want to talk about what I think is on a lot of investors' minds for China, which is the policy put this year. Between now and the 2 sessions, for example, later this afternoon we have the PBOC and SAFE coming out with a press conference. What do you think between now and 2 sessions is the government going to do to stabilize market sentiment, and to what extent especially do you think is the government prepared to defend the yuan after Trump gets inaugurated?
Well, in terms of policies, the real issue is not whether China has the spending ability to expand fiscal deficits or to expand monetary policy. It definitely does. For how much longer, I don't know, but for now it does. The problem in China is not so much that they haven't been spending enough, but they've been spending on the wrong part of the economy. So the China team from the IMF were in town last week, and I met with them, and they told me that their estimate of what they call the augmented deficit, the real deficit of China, is something like 13% of GDP. Now, when you have a deficit of anything close to that number and generating only nominal growth of maybe 4%, no one can accuse you of being skimpy on spending. The problem in China is the spending is on the supply side of the economy. So it's mostly more investment, more support for manufacturing, etc. Whereas China's problem is clearly on the demand side. So for me, the question is not will they continue easing, will they continue expanding fiscally? For me, the question is will they start shifting some of that from the supply side of the economy to the demand side? And so far there's a lot of talk, but there haven't been any real numbers.
And what do you think is preventing the government from actually shifting the priority to the demand side, even though they keep signaling that that is a priority for them?
Yeah, well, you know, many people say it's ideological. I'm not sure that's the case. I think that it's a much older problem, and that is for 30 years, 40 years, you've built China around a whole series of transfers from direct and some hidden transfers from the household sector to subsidize investment and manufacturing and production in general. And as a result, that's what the institutional structure of China is able to do. You know, we think that it's very easy to increase income and demand on the household side, but we forget that the US and Europe have been doing this for decades, so they have an institution in place to do it. In China, it's quite difficult. First of all, national government expenditures don't go to the household sector. They have to go through the provincial governments, then through the municipal governments, and then to the households. And there are many opportunities because local governments are so strapped for cash. There's many opportunities to divert some of those funds into other areas. So the real problem is not that they don't want to increase the demand side. The real problem is that they don't know how to do that without incurring costs on the supply side of the economy.
Okay, that's very interesting. Let's talk about the two sessions, because there's been a lot of reports suggesting that the government may set a target of around 5% growth again this year, even though consensus forecast is below that. Right. I believe Goldman Sachs forecast is 4.5%. What do you make of that government target? Is it too ambitious?
It's too ambitious in the sense that the economy isn't really delivering that kind of growth. But it's not too ambitious in the sense that they can't achieve it. As long as they have debt capacity and are willing to borrow and spend, build more unnecessary bridges, more empty factories, etc., they can get any GDP number they want, which is why I always assumed that they were going to hit this year 4.9%, around that level, because they can do so. The problem is that that's not healthy growth. That's what the Hungarian economist Janos Kornai calls soft budget constrained growth. If you don't have to worry about going bankrupt, you can keep spending money forever on things that make no economic sense. And I think that's the problem in China, a lot of non-economic spending to generate the kind of economic activity that they want.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're of the view that the bulk of the stimulus we have seen so far last year, a big part of that is dedicated to tackling local government debt. But you're of the view that 10 trillion yuan is not really effective.
Yeah, what that really does is it's indirectly a stimulus. The purpose is to shift all of the hidden local government debt onto the balance sheet, which is a good thing. You need to know where the debt is and how much debt you have if you're going to resolve it. The stimulus impact is really that it lowered the interest rate costs a little bit. But there are two problems with that. Problem number one is that the total amount of savings was so small that ultimately, even if they were correctly spent, they really wouldn't matter. Problem number two is that when you lower interest rates, you lower the revenues for the banking system, because it's mostly banks who lend to the local governments. And the banks need to be recapitalized anyway. So by lowering their profits, you're simply increasing the amount by which you need to recapitalize them. So you're not really saving money, you're shifting money around. What they need to do is shift resources to the household sector.
And how would they do that? Are you talking about handouts?
Handouts is one way. The coupon program, the trade-in coupon program is another way. Paying more money to people who have retired is another way. Lowering rental costs is another way. There are lots of different ways.
So they're already starting to do a little bit of that. So you're saying ramp it up, do it large scale.
Exactly right. Because when you add up all of their programs, they're really tiny. What we need are big programs that shift income to the household sector.
All right, thank you so much. That was Michael Pettis, finance professor at Peking University.
说完他的分享，我对他的这个观点简单做一下总结吧。第一呢，就是当下人们普遍有抑郁和紧张感，与几年前在下行周期对未来有无限潜力的这种感受呢不同。第二呢，就是关于 GDP 的目标吧，你定多少目标呢，其实是次要的，关键是你能看持续产生经济效用的 GDP 有多少。你一直去花钱去在一些没人用的公共设施和过剩的产能上，意义不大。第三个呢，就是中国的赤字率已经足够高了，所以不是还要多花多少钱的问题，是把多花的钱从生产部门转移到居民部门的问题，这能提升消费啊。第四点呢，现在已经在做了一些改善，比如说降低房贷利率啊、消费补贴啊、增加社保啊等等等等，但是金额呢还远远不够。我们都知道，当下中国的经济问题是消费不足啊，如果还是花钱搞基建啊，产生的效益有限。因为该建的都建的差不多了，而且流到普通民众的手里的钱呢也有限。就跟我之前说，广东农民工讨薪的那个视频，300万的钱，对吧准备花300万去搞什么地标建筑，结果呢，转手130万转给没有资质的开发商，而且还只是给别人30多万，剩下呢还不想给。你就说这个300万最终有多少万流到农民工的手里呢？你说农民工没有钱，他怎么消费呢？对吧？再说消费补贴，这个意义也有限，大家现在是信心不足啊。 房子在跌，股市被套，还动不动被裁员，到处都是找不到工作的，社会福利保障又弱，难道就为了那一点的补贴就敢消费了吗？社会保障弱的情况下，大家不敢消费。其实最好的方式是增加社会福利保障，同时给民众发钱，直接发钱，减少中间商赚差价。反正现在也有这个技术手段嘛。但还是那句话啊，白花花的银子啊发给穷人就是造孽。好，这次的分享呢就到这里，谢谢大家。